In this tutorial, we're going to talk about RemoteTouch. RemoteTouch is actually an incredible feature because it allows you to connect digital signage with your audience's mobile devices. So if a customer walks into a store, he can pull out his mobile device like an iPhone or an Android or even an iPad, and as long as that device is online, he can take his device, point it at the screen, and scan a QR code. As soon as he scans this QR code, the phone or whatever device he's holding would bind to that screen and he could start managing that screen. In other words, he can select which products to look at, he can flip through items, and he can essentially change the presentation through his handheld device. Another great feature of RemoteTouch is the ability for you to create a completely customizable HTML and JavaScript pages that will load on your customer's handheld device. So for example, if you wanted to create a JavaScript slider, or if you wanted to create drop-down menus, or whatever kind of navigation system that you wanted to create on your customer's handheld device, in other words, this will be the page that opens up when they scan the QR. So these pages are created via HTML, which are very, very simple to create. You don't have to be a programmer to create simple HTML pages. You don't need any JavaScript if you don't want to. And you can simply take this HTML page, upload it to some web hosting company like GoDaddy, and simply link to that. So this allows you to create a fully customizable experience for your audience. So I know this maybe sounds like a lot, but don't worry, I'm going to go through every single step and show you how to configure everything. And by the time we're done, you'll be able to deploy digital signage in your business, and better yet, have your customers interact with your signage through their mobile devices. So let's begin. So the first thing we need to do is we need to log into our enterprise account, since this feature is part of the enterprise edition, and we need to enable the feature for our customers. So what we need to do is we need to go to the media store and make sure that the QR code is part of the installed components, and it is. Next, we want to go ahead and switch back to users, and we want to create a user that really has no permissions or no privileges except a single permission or a simple privilege, which is to actually send commands. This is for security reasons. If somebody finds the username and password of that particular user, he will not be able to do anything, since we'll use that user as the account that's actually going to send the JavaScript command. So again, don't worry about the details for now, but just know that the first thing we need to do is set up a very, very limited user that really has no special privileges except to send commands. So we'll go ahead and click on the plus sign right here to add a new user, which is called demo send, since this user will only be able to send commands. I'm going to give it a very simple password of 123123. Click on OK. And then we'll go and switch to privileges. Add a new set of privileges and go ahead and call this limited. Make sure we take all the privileges off, so limited will really not be able to do anything. Okay, so you can see I've taken everything out for the limited privileges. The only single feature or privilege that I'm going to enable is the send commands. So right here, enable the send commands to station. That's the only single privilege that limited can do, and I'll go ahead and save my work. Click on submit right here. Next, we'll switch back to privilege, which is our default privilege set, and make sure that we enable the event system. So under campaigns, just make sure that you do enable the event system. Again, this is not for the limited privileges, this is for the full privilege set. So we've enabled that, and go ahead and save our work. So just to recap, our default privilege set has full control, and we've enabled the event system. Then we created a limited privilege set that really has no special privileges within the system other than just to send commands. Next, we'll switch back to users. Select our demo send user that really is not going to have much control or much power, and make sure, it is really important, to give it the limited privilege set. So this particular user can only do whatever we allow him, which is to send commands, and click on save. And that's it. We're done here with Enterprise Studio, and we can go ahead and log into the Signage Studio. So here in the Signage Studio, I'm just going to log in with my standard user that has all the privileges. Just go ahead and log in. And you'll see we have a campaign right here called campaign. Really nothing special about this campaign. It has a screen division with some empty channels. So we'll go ahead and use this campaign to create our configuration for RemoteTouch. So the first thing we need to do is we need to decide which content or which timelines we want to expose to our audience. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create several timelines, and I'm going to allow my visitors to be able to select these timelines through product selection using a JavaScript slider. So what I'll do is I'll call my first timeline RC Helis and just do a full screen. Go ahead and do another one called RC Boats, and also just a full screen. This one I'm going to call Model Trains. Next timeline, we'll go ahead and call it RC Planes. So I have here my default timeline that's going to play on regular basis, but when a person scans a QR, he'll be able to select particular timelines through a JavaScript slider. Also, as soon as the person scans the QR, I'm also going to want to present to him a welcome screen. So I'll go ahead and set up a timeline for that as well. And I'll call it my welcome timeline and click on finish as well. So to recap, I'm going to have my regular presentation that's going to run on a regular basis. Then I will have 4 timelines that my visitor is going to be able to select, which is going to be the RC Helis, RC Boats, Trains, and Planes. And as soon as he scans the QR, before he even makes a selection, I will show him a welcome screen. Next, what I need to do is go to Sequences and make sure that I remove all the timelines from my regular playback. Since on regular playback, I don't want any of these timelines to play. I just want my regular timeline to play, but none of the RC or the welcome timelines. So that's pretty straightforward. We're just going to be playing timeline 1 over and over in a continuous mode until a selection is made through QR. Now, in order to save some time, I went ahead and pre-filled my channels with some content. This will be the default timeline. It's going to play if nothing is selected through QR. Then I went ahead and just put a full screen on the RC Boats, just an image. On the Model Trains, again, just a full screen image. The welcome timeline, again, this is the time that's going to play as soon as a customer scans the QR. So I just, again, put a full screen image, nothing special there. And to configure the collection for the RC Helis, I'll double click the collection. Let's go ahead and make a little bit more room here. Go to the properties. I'll go ahead and select kiosk, not slideshow. Next, I'll go to items. And I'll start dragging and dropping all the images that I want to be part of my collection. So I want a total of 4 images. Next, we'll switch to the events under the collection, and I'll go ahead and add the 2 events. Now, you can name these events anything you want, but you need to remember the name because we'll actually have to reference these names later on when we build the HTML page. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and call this event next, just a string, and previous. And so this collection is going to be listening to the string event next, and it's going to also be listening to the previous event. And if it receives the next event, it's going to move to the next item in the collection, which is, of course, is the next image. And over here, we're going to actually set to previous. So it's going to flip through the different products or the different images, really, that we have over here under items. And so now that our collection is set up for RC Helis, let's go ahead and set up the same collection for RC Cars. Again, double click the collection to load up its properties. Set it to kiosk. Look for our cars, which we have over here 4 images. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Events, 2 events. Next, and previous. And previous. So both the collections, both the RC Cars and the RC Helis collections, are listening for the same string events, next and previous, and the command they're going to execute upon this event, again, are just going to be next and previous. So all pretty simple and straightforward. This will be a good time to save our work. Click on File, Save. And now that the collections are set up, let's go ahead and switch over to our main timeline. And you'll notice over here, if I select my screen division configuration, you'll notice that I didn't put over here anything on channel 0. So if I click on play, you'll notice that everything is set up and I have an image here and some RSS, but I have no content over here on the right channel, on the blue channel. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to show you how to configure the QR. So I'll go ahead and stop this, switch to my components, select the QR component, drag and drop it to channel 0. Now we'll double click the QR code component to load up its properties. And notice that we're presented with a few options here. We can of course just type in our own text. So this will be just the kind of standard vanilla QR, nothing special about that, and it's going to display on the screen anything that we put here. However, there's a couple more options we can choose from. We have the ability to go from URL, and this is actually a pretty powerful concept. What this allows you to do is set up a URL address, and this URL will actually return a string. So this will be a web service that you provide, and anything that this domain returns will get submitted to the screen as QR code. So if you wanted to, for example, have a coupon of a QR code that submit to a particular web address that changes every day, you can simply point this URL to a web address and the QR will change respectively. However, this is not what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and use RemoteTouch. So we'll delete this string, so make sure there's nothing there, and then we'll switch to RemoteTouch. Now notice when we switch to RemoteTouch, by default we are already getting a URL that's going to be used, and this is just a demo URL that we provide for you, and it's actually a pretty cool setup that you can use to just demo and learn about the system and play around with it. And then once you're done playing with the system, you actually want to deploy it, you can go ahead and provide your own URL and build your own HTML page, and I will show you that in just a second. So we'll just go ahead and leave everything as default for right now. Next, we need to provide the username and the password. This will be the limited username and the limited password that we've created earlier. So remember earlier we created a username called demosend. So we'll go ahead and put the demosend username and the password of 123123 that we created earlier during the beginning of this video tutorial. And so again, this is a user that really can't do much but send commands. And now to finalize our work, we have to actually configure the campaign itself to support the QR events. So we'll switch over here to our campaign. We'll select our campaign, which is just called campaign. Select the events tab, and we'll go ahead and add events right here using the plus sign just like before. And these events you can really name anything you want, but again you gotta make a note of these event names, these strings, because you'll need to reference them later on in the JavaScript and HTML file. So let's go ahead and just add 4 events, and we'll go ahead and call each event for timeline 1, event for timeline 2, for timeline 3, and for timeline 4. Next, we need to choose what's going to happen once this event is triggered. So we'll go ahead and leave everything as click by default. And what we'll do is actually let's go ahead and set up a little more real estate space here so we can see more. And so for event 1, what we're going to do is select timeline, and we'll select the RC helis. For timeline 2, we'll go ahead and select our boats. For timeline 3, we'll select our trains. And for timeline 4, we'll select our cars. Now again, this is of course completely up to you. You can configure this any way you like. Now I'll go ahead and add another event, and I'll go ahead and name this my event welcome. And event welcome will trigger as soon as somebody scans the QR. So we'll go ahead and set this to be our welcome timeline, and I'll go ahead and set up one last event. This event I'm actually going to call the exit button event. That will give the customer the option to exit the presentation or to exit control if he'd like. And if he does exit, I'm not going to select timeline, but I'm actually going to resume the normal presentation, which in our case is going to be just this timeline over here. And so that's it. I've set up everything that I needed. Everything is ready to go. I have a total of 6 events. I have 4 events for actual specific timeline selection. I have the event for welcome that's going to trigger as soon as somebody scans the QR code on the screen. And I have an event for the exit if the customer decides that he wants to exit. And so normal presentation is going to resume. Let's go ahead and save our work before we can test it. Now, before we test it out, I do want to cover one more thing, and that's the last option over here, which is by default set to auto resume. This means that if a customer selects, for example, the RC helis, this timeline is set to 1 minute in length, which means that the timeline is going to play for 1 minute, and once it's over, it's going to go back to our regular sequences, which is just a single timeline, our default timeline. You do also have the option to set manually resume. And this would come into play if you add additional buttons where the customer could navigate with. So for example, if you're creating a menu or some sort of navigation system, the manually resume can be used to navigate from one page to the next. But by default, again, if you set the auto resume, it's automatically going to play this one timeline RC helis for 1 minute, and then when that's over, it's going to go back to the regular timeline so other customers could have the opportunity to control the screen. So here we're looking at the presentation running. You can't really see the whole screen, but you should see a good portion of it, and you can see the important part, which is the QR code. Now I'm going to go ahead and take out my cell phone, and I'm going to use a QR code. Now you can't really see my cell phone because obviously I'm holding it and you're only seeing my screen. So I'll go ahead and scan the QR. So you can see as soon as I scanned the QR with my phone, automatically we received the welcome screen. Now obviously you guys can't see my phone, so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and simulate this using a browser window, and this is exactly the same thing I'm seeing on my phone, so there's really no difference. So I'll go ahead and bring my browser over here so you can see my browser, and this is exactly the same thing I'm seeing on my phone. If you have an iPhone or an Android, that's exactly what you're going to be seeing as well. So what you can see here is practically my mobile device that I can go ahead and start making selection. And you can see this is working beautifully. It's hardware accelerated. It's all in HTML5, JavaScript. And what I can do is I can go ahead and basically slide through products. Now if I take my mouse or my finger, obviously if this is a phone, and select a particular product, look what's going to happen. It switched over here to the helicopter timeline. Now I'll go ahead and select a different product, which is going to be the boats. Again with my finger, if my phone, select it, and it switches over. And I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the trains and for the RC cars. So you can see that our timeline switching is working beautifully. So you notice that over here on the bottom we have the previous and the next, and that's where the collection comes into play. So I'll go ahead and select my helicopters and then click on next. So you can see now I can actually flip through the collection, the actual products. And again, remember I'm doing this from my cell phone. So this is really powerful. Your customer can do the same thing. If I switch over here to boats and click on next, nothing will happen because we didn't set up a collection for the boats. We only set up a collection on the helis and on the RC cars. So I'll go and switch to RC cars. And remember, once you switch to it, again, you have to select it with your finger and then use the collection. Next, previous. Also, we added the exit button. So I'll go ahead and click on that. Remember, we did an event for that as well. So as soon as I click on that, I get thank you for using RemoteTouch. You'll notice that the presentation goes back to the default timeline, and if I click on OK, I get redirected to the home page. So all this can be easily configured in JavaScript, and I'll show you all that in just a second. Now I did want to make a couple of quick side notes. One thing is that every time a timeline loads, or even if you stop the player and restart it, what's going to happen is that this QR gets regenerated, and that's actually a good thing because this QR has unique identifiers for both the screen that it's running on as well as just unique identifiers making sure that this QR was never generated before. This allows your customers to take control of the screen and make sure that nobody else can take control of the screen at the same time. So for example, if you went ahead and scanned this QR, you would receive dedicated control over the screen and no other customer at the store would be able to get access to the same screen at the same time, so they're not going to interfere with your work. So this is some sort of a queuing system that's intelligent and it's completely transparent. You don't have to configure any of it. It's already embedded inside the QR. Also, if you have multiple screens in your store, the QR is smart enough to embed the screen ID. So again, you can have multiple QRs, completely transparent to you, nothing that you have to configure, and yet some customers can control screen A while other customers can control screen B using the same QR, the same timeline. Very powerful and very easy to set up. And so far I've shown you how to configure the Enterprise Studio, adding the QR component and configuring the limited account. Also, I showed you how to set up the Signage Studio with both the RemoteTouch as well as the collection. And I showed you the presentation, how it actually works controlling it from a mobile device. But there's still one missing part, and that's the most exciting part, which is the front user interface. That's what the user actually interacts with, the JavaScript or the HTML. So let's go ahead and show you this last part, and then you'll be able to simply follow the same steps and deploy RemoteTouch in your business. So over here right now we're looking at the file that actually loaded on the client side, or I should say on the mobile device. So when the customer was able to slide through the different images of the helicopter and the boat, this is the file that he was looking at. And it just so happened to be hosted on our server, but it doesn't have to be. Because remember, if I go back to the Signage Studio, you see that right now it's hosted on our server and you can use it no problem for demos and just to play around with the system. But once you're ready to deploy, you'll just copy this file or create your own file, and I'll explain to you how to do that as well. And you can just host it on GoDaddy and grab it from there, and then your customers can have a completely different JavaScript and HTML file. They could have a different navigation system, a different menuing system. They can order food. I mean, anything and everything you want they can do through the mobile device, and you simply create it through HTML or JavaScript. So again, in this case, you can go ahead and use our file just for demoing, and it works great. So let's go and talk about this file and see how it's constructed. So the first portion of the file is mostly just CSS stuff, and that's just presentation and layout. So you really don't have to worry about it too much, and nothing that you need to concern yourself with, because you'll create your own file anyway. So this is just all layout stuff. But over here you have a couple of really important files. One is jQuery. So you do need to make sure you have jQuery 1.4 or newer version loaded, and you can grab jQuery from everywhere pretty much. It's online, and I'll post a link where you can grab jQuery. And the second file that you need is the RemoteTouch.js. This is our library that will allow you to communicate with our web service, so you can send commands from the mobile device to the backend, to our servers. So again, these are the two files that you need to make sure that you have in your own HTML/JavaScript. You just need to make sure that you have this file, and then you can just do a single JavaScript click on a button as well with an ID. So it can be very, very simple. You can have 3 buttons that just send events. So again, just remember that you have the jQuery 1.4 or greater, and the same link right here for the RemoteTouch. Now, scrolling down, I'll go ahead and emphasize some of the important stuff. So basically what I have here is I have 4 buttons, button 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see that what I do is I send the RemoteTouch command, and I send the event. Now this should look pretty familiar, because these are exactly the same events that we set up in the Sunlight Studio for the 4 timelines. So let's go ahead and go back to our Sunlight Studio, and we're going to go back to the events. And you notice the events for the timelines? Well, these are exactly the same file names, or I should say the same strings, as we do have over here. So this is pretty straightforward. You're just simply sending the command to fire the event. So in our case, if you, for example, select the helicopter, or if you select the RC cars, this button gets fired, and therefore we send this RemoteTouch command. Again, very straightforward, nothing too fancy here. Also, we have the previous and next. These will be for the collection. Again, we're basically saying that if you click on the previous button, we're going to fire the event of prev. And if we click on next, we're going to fire the event of next. Again, all pretty straightforward. If we go back to the Sunlight Studio, and if we look over here under the collection, double click the collection, go to the events, you see that we have the next and the prev. And so this is where we are referencing these events. If I go back to the RC cars, double click the collection, again you'll notice next and prev. If, for example, I change this to next one, then my next button, although with fire the event, this collection would not move forward or to the next page, because the name would not match. So you need to make sure that these names exactly match the same events that you're firing on the JavaScript side. Next, you'll see that we also have an exit button, and the exit button does a couple of things. First, it sends the same command, the RemoteTouch, for the exit button. And again, going back to the studio, you'll notice that if I go back to my campaign and to the events, the exit button will resume presentation. So that's pretty straightforward. When you click on the exit button, it's just going to go back to our normal sequences. And I'll go back to the script again. And also, I'm setting an alert over here just for the client to see on his iPhone. Thank you for using RemoteTouch. And then I'm redirecting him to our website, to helihobby.com, which is a RC website. Now, of course, this will be your JavaScript that you're going to develop, so you can send them to your website. You can have full control over this and do whatever you want. In fact, because you are going to be the one who's developing this script, you can just pay an outsourcing guy roughly $100. You should be able to develop something like this for you. It's very inexpensive. It's a very, very simple script. Any developer can really whip it up in a few hours. So you can create a completely customized script with menus and selections and buttons, and you can really go back and forth, and you can get really, really elaborate. Between the timeline selection and the collection, you can pretty much do anything and everything you want as far as selection from the mobile device. If we continue and go down, these are just different settings that are used for the actual slider. Again, if you're going to use a slider, then you can use the same settings, but you don't necessarily need to. But these are all things that are very specific to the slider. You don't necessarily have to use a slider. You can use buttons or pretty much anything you want. So the important stuff, the stuff that you want to pay attention to, is right here, the send command. Actually, I did miss one thing that I wanted to go over. Remember that as soon as we scanned the QR code, we were we were welcomed by a welcome screen. And you can see over here that what happens is that as soon as this JavaScript page loads, before we even select anything, before we select the helicopter or the boat, but as soon as the page loads, it's right here on document ready, we send a RemoteTouch EV welcome. So that's why we received the timeline for event welcome, because we sent it as soon as the page loads. We didn't wait for a selection on a particular collection. We didn't wait for a selection on a particular timeline. We just boom, right away sent this event welcome. The web service received it and said, okay, well, he wants the welcome timeline, and jumped into that. So again, that's how we achieve this welcome screen, by just sending this event right away. This is actually important because what you want to do is you want to make sure that as soon as a person scans the QR code, you want to give this person complete control of the screen. You don't want two people to scan the QR at the same time. So you want to have a person complete dedicated control over a screen. So that's why we did this. So he basically grabs control over the screen and has proprietary control of the screen until it lets go. So there's no interruption. You don't want 2 or 3 people scanning the same QR. And that could be, for example, if we took this line out, what's going to happen is that he could scan the QR, he can load a page, the page would load and he would see it on the phone, but he could maybe browse helicopters and planes and not make any selection, and the QR would still be on the screen. And so a second person can come, he could scan the QR, and now he can grab control of the screen. So you don't want that. You want to give this person that scanned first the QR code complete control over the screen. Therefore, you want to take him away from the QR. You want to remove the QR from the screen, and you don't want anybody else to see it. So that's why you want to right away to show this event to move away from the welcome screen. I know this tutorial was a little bit long, but I hope you enjoyed it. This is really a powerful feature. I think every business can really benefit from this. This is truly the marriage between mobile and digital signage. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact our live chat. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.